And there's some, and if
First
you're...
one was
Sorry. Oh, that's okay.
Right.
Hi, so I'm really hoping to, so I'm Amy Newell, I'm the executive director here at the Historical Society. I really hoped more people would come and want to share. So I'm a little disappointed that we don't have more stories to tell. I had a couple from some of the sources in our library that I thought I could pick one or two. I was thinking if I needed to get people excited about telling stories. I think Tom has a story he might be willing to come up and tell. But I think, did you have stories or you're here to?
No, we just brought teachers.
Oh, well, that's great too. So I think we'll be a little bit cozy, but I guess we'll forge ahead with those of us who are here. So why don't I read one of mine and then you can tell yours and I can read the other one. If I stand over here, is this good? Okay. So when I was putting together the exhibit upstairs, because I am not from the area, so I was alive when Agnes happened. I was very little, so I don't have any firsthand stories. But we did have a few documents in our library collection that I used when I was putting the exhibit up together upstairs. And I ended up using a couple of quotes. If you've been up there, you've seen on the walls. I used a couple of quotes from those sources, but I thought I would read a little bit more from them both. So this is from a letter that was written in October of 1972 by a woman named Bonnie Payne Tubbs. And I was really hoping someone tonight would be here and would be able to tell me more about her, because I don't know too much about her other than what's in the letter. But it's about probably 8 or 9 pages long, typewritten. You can see, we have a copy of it, so you can see, single-spaced, so it's very detailed. But one of the stories that I liked, I'll just read this part of it. The stories one hears of how people were rescued are unending. One neighbor of Mother's, 3 doors up the street, climbed out on the roof and climbed into a basket suspended from a helicopter and was then pulled up inside the whirlybird and with other rescued persons deposited at the airport, high and dry, where a haven was quickly established for all the evacuees. Another 74-year-old spinster was ferried around Kingston for 3 hours with others in a Coast Guard boat while they collected others and tried to find a place to leave them all safely. She finally was landed up in Wyoming and taken to a school where mattresses were laid on the floor, and in co-ed fashion, they all bedded down for the night and some rest. A man got kind of fresh with this old lady on the mattress next to hers, and she decided to find a better sanctuary for the duration, so called a nurse who had taken care of Daddy when he was ill, and asked if the invitation still stood, and could she come stay with her. The nurse said of course, and somehow the spinster arrived, and all she had with her was 2 pairs of underdrawers, 1 in each coat pocket, all she had thought necessary to take when she finally agreed to be evacuated from her apartment. I had best add many people refused to leave their homes, thinking the whole situation was greatly exaggerated and they wanted to remain to guard their possessions. Of course, this made extra trouble and danger for the rescue crews. And then she keeps talking about the experiences. And so after the floodwaters had started to recede, she talks about cleaning up afterwards. And so she writes, after the initial shock wore off, Anna and Mother went upstairs because Mother was tiring and Anna was scared to death she was going to slip and fall in the mud, and walking on the carpets was particularly hazardous, strangely enough. I looked around and wondered where to begin. There was no clean surface. You couldn't take things outside because it was worse out there. You didn't want to take things upstairs and mess that area. Where to start? The water was polluted and of course cold, but I did clean off the sink and counters in the pantry and started collecting china dishes, candlesticks, ashtrays, salt and pepper shakers, framed pictures, all the things lying on the floor in the mud. Bruce and his gang hosed off the front porch and dragged furniture out there and hosed them off. We gathered rugs and piled the small ones on the porch. They eventually cleared one room of everything and got out the hose and literally hosed the library floor. Bruce said, I never thought I'd see the day when I'd stand in Graham's library with a hose and snow shovel and pushed such a mess down her floor registers. So I felt like that was a very descriptive account. I don't know, Tom, if you wanted to come in.
Stand up.
Yeah, you can come up. So.
I moved back to the area, I moved to the area in 1970. Knew nothing about the flood, even though the river was very nice, and I was living next to Temple Israel in a third-floor apartment. I was on the faculty at Misericordia, and I remember I'd been out of town. I'd come back in town. I was in a third-floor apartment, and I was listening to the WBRE radio, I think at that time, had a radio station. And I was listening to it, and it said, General Townend said everybody who was in the flood of 1936 should evacuate. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, I don't even know where the flood of 36 was. And I guess this is the assumption we would all know. You mentioned the same thing almost occurred in 212, saying anybody who was in the flood of 72 should evacuate. So trying to figure out where I was and how I get out and where I would go. At that point, they evacuated, and Misericordia, at that time, Nesbitt Hospital was a primary obstetrics unit there, and they moved it up to Misericordia to Alumni Hall. And so there was a number of babies that were born during that post-flood period. So I remember that. I remember going down South Franklin Street. I had some manuscript that was being typed by a typist, a result of several years' work. And it was done by a typist. I had done it stupidly in a red felt pen on yellow legal pads with a lot of notes that she kept with her. And of course that all went to the place and nobody was there. And so it was time to go. National Guard said it's time to get out of here. And so I got out. I remember coming back in afterwards, and South Franklin was just unbelievable. There's pictures and everybody's experience of it. And people were very distraught, and so we all kind of gathered together to try to help people. There was a woman who lived in a very nice house on South Franklin, whose husband had been a general. And so as they had traveled around the world, she had collected items, beautiful antique mahogany from the Philippines and all that. And she was so distraught, and so that there was that initial thoughts after the flood, I got to get rid of all this stuff. And she would just throw it out, Tom, throw it out. And I mean, these mahogany tables and these things. And I said, well, we can save them. We can try to have these rugs cleaned, because I didn't know what darn thing what I was talking about. And she said, no, just throw it out. So several of us just kind of put it aside, like we had thrown it out, and then later kind of talked to her. And they were able to save a number. But at least that initial idea was just to try to get rid of everything. Those things that people were most distraught about were the things that they couldn't recover, the pictures and the frames. So that's my story. And the only third is a wag that I taught with who had been through the flood. And he said the only good thing that came out of the flood of 1972 was it kept his dad from talking constantly about the flood of 36. And to some extent that's very true, because if you really remember, it's a watershed moment for the valley. The demographics of the valley change, the movement to the back mountain areas, the whole thing's changed, and nobody talked about the flood of 36 after that. So that's some of my memories.
So you said, did you have some photos?
No, I just brought pictures. If anybody wants to look at them.
Yeah, sure.
Where are they from?
They're from up north of Worcester, up near the Slogan Playground.
Maybe more, but I just brought a couple, I didn't know. But I was in Plymouth, I was only 12 years old, and I was staying with my aunt when it happened, and they came through at 11 o'clock at night and told us we had to evacuate. And she had 2 young babies with her and us, and her car wouldn't start, so somebody had to come pick us up, take us up to one of my grandmother's, where I got stuck for a whole month and a half, so she couldn't get back and forth.
So you were out for a month and a half?
Yeah, away from home, yeah.
And so these are in...
Let me see my glasses.
I know this is where my... because I'm new, I'm not as good
Joe, you could explain the
Yeah,
video. They're his parents' pictures from their home.
Guys, can you just step to the podium for me,
Yeah.
please?
Yeah.
There's microphones on the podium.
This one here, this is the house across from the Slocum Playground. And that's the water line right there. And if you go near Turkey Hill up on North Canal right now, they have a water line mark
Yes.
on the pole.
One of the signs they just put up.
Right,
Yeah.
but that's not accurate because I have the proof right here that it was higher than, it was a few feet higher than that.
Do you mind if we just pass these around?
Yeah, you can pass that around. And this one here, this is a, this is somebody in a rowboat right here, a motorboat. That's my brother. And to the left of him over here, that's where Turkey Hill is now. And that's the Francis Slocum Playground. And that's in the motorboat there. And this is a picture right in front of the Francis Slocum Playground. They're going down the road in the motorboat right there.
Yep.
He's right on Pennsylvania Ave. The road is right underneath him. And these two here are the same car. This car here, it's in a lot of the flood books, where there's a pole going through the front of the car, the back window of the car, the front window, and everybody thinks it's from the water. I remember back at the time, there was a neighbor, and he had a little bit too much to drink at the time, and the water was level with the windows, so he pushed the pole through the back window and the front window of the car. But if you look in the flood books, you think it's from the water pressure. But no, it was the drunk neighbor. He pushed them through. So you can look at them too.
That's kind of a good story.
That's a really good story, actually.
And that's in front of the Oasis Inn on Penn Ave.
Oh, imagine that.
How did you get the ball through?
Hmm?
How did you get the
I don't know what he was drunk. I was a teenager at the time. I don't know how he did that. You see it?
Can we,
I remember I was
is
told.
there a way we can show you the
I'll get them with Ralph when we're all finished, yeah.
if you're okay with that? Great. So Mark, you must have some kind of family story.
Well, I got two. I don't know how true they are, because of course I wasn't alive. But my father, my parents lived in Plains, and they lived on Wilcox Street, which is probably the highest point in Plains. So if Wilcox Street ever floods, build an ark, because we're all going. But he was telling the story about how everybody knows, 44th Cemetery, a lot of graves were washed up. They actually came, and Plains has a habit, they did it in 2011 again. Plains has a very small police department. I mean, when I was growing up, there were 5 cops, 2 day shift, 2 night shift, and a chief. And I think now with the casino, I think they're up to 11 or 12. So they've always had a very small police force. And so they get in the habit of deputizing people, just like the Old West. They still do it. They did it in 2011. They got the old man, they deputized him. So they got my grandfather in 72, and he actually went out and was one of the people that was recovering the bodies from 44th Cemetery. And supposedly, you were supposed to be paid $100 cash a day to collect remains, which was big money in 72. The other story was interesting. My father-in-law eventually became the fire chief for Wilkes-Barre, but in 72, he was just rookie. He was just a probie. And there was you've probably seen the pictures of it in the Wrath of Agnes and whatnot. There was a big fire on Ross Street. And he was saying how they got called out. And it's underwater, so they had to go further up north to find a fire extinguisher that's maybe only under knee-high water, or hydrant, to get to it. And they had 3 boats. People had brought a bunch of boats down from the back mountain from Harvey's Lake to help with the rescue. So they had 3 civilian boats that they had basically commandeered. And they're trying to stand on these boats with these hoses that are daisy-chained for blocks and fight the fire. And of course, the thing with a boat is there's no brakes on a boat. The boat goes where the water wants to go. So they would have one guy running the motor, trying to counteract the backblast from the fire hoses. He said, and after about 2 hours, they said, look, it's hopeless. We can't do anything with it. And they basically had to just sit there and keep other houses from burning. He said, it's bizarre. You go through the academy and you learn, how to put up walls of water, how to prevent things, but you never think about fighting a fire on water. It's just something they don't They don't teach you. But that's all I got. 'Cause I wasn't here.
I can read this excerpt from the other sort of eyewitness account that I used when I was working on the exhibit. This one, it's again a typewritten sort of autobiography, I guess. It's a small book by someone named Elwood Disk, and he was living in Florida when he put this together, and I think he must have just sent the Historical Society a copy of it. I think he put it together in the 1980s, but it's sort of a diary, day by day, and he calls it Muddling Through. And again, it had lots of really great detail, and I'm just reading a little bit of it, but it was definitely very, I just sort of, as I read it, it was very touching and very also encouraging, again, about the stories about people helping each other, which was something that when I was putting the exhibit together really came out to me. But so on June 23rd, the big day, he writes, and I think he must have been in Wilkes-Barre, living in Wilkes-Barre. He writes, other neighbors started to leave, but I decided to stay and keep busy. After dressing, I ate breakfast, cleaned the upstairs, and called a few friends. Since I was one of the oldest residents of the area, I knew it would be difficult to return to our homes because of martial law. Therefore, I decided to stay. Why not? I had been a refugee once, and that was enough. We had never had water in the house before. Why should this time be any different? However, I should take precautions. I started moving things from the cellar. There was not much to move because previous experiences taught me not to keep much in the cellar. I also moved as much as I could from the first floor to the second floor. Then I went to the front porch to check, and I saw this huge wave of water rushing down the street. By the time I got to the dining room, I was up to my knees in water. I took a loaf of bread, peanut butter, a knife, a can opener, I don't know why, a package of meatloaf, and went to the second floor. The water continued to rise. And so the next day, he writes, I woke up about 8 a.m. hearing the furniture bang against the ceiling of the first floor. I turned on the radio. The Susquehanna River now extended 5 miles on both sides of its banks, a large lake of mud filled with acid and oil, and a rooftop jutting out here and there. I suddenly realized I would be living in the attic longer than one day. I rationed myself to 3 slices of bread a day, plus snacks. The seeds satisfied me and relieved the hunger. I also went sparingly on the drinking water. And so he keeps going and he writes every day, and then a little day or two later, he writes, I should be somewhere helping many, because many have lost more than I have. I attempted to flag down a helicopter from the attic window. There had been friendly waves before as they flew by. I knew they were on more important missions than picking up one person. They were just trying to keep me cheerful. Finally, one arrived, but the trees around the house and the high-voltage wires prevented them from coming close enough to pick me up. The huge waves created by the propeller just washed over 2-story houses across the street. I was glad when they left and decided to start cleaning up when the water had subsided. Front and back porch roofs of the houses are beginning to show. Some garages are tilted or overturned. Others have remained firm. This tells me something about their contractors. So this is he's really, it's a really fun account to read. I mean, it seems weird to say fun, but it's really an interesting account to read, and his perspective mixes in some of that. And I think, again, because I think he put this together several years afterwards, so he had clearly had some time to kind of come to terms with it. But then the last one I'll read is an entry from July 17th, 1972, where they were well into recovering and cleaning up, and he writes quite a bit about that. I think it goes, his little biography goes till, it goes at least until December of 72, might go into 1973, so it gives sort of a nice account. But anyway, July 17th, 1972, he wrote, I left a note for the hawks and volunteer workers to enter and clean. I must still go to the post office to get the mail. There was a lot of activity in town. Traffic was rather heavy, and there were many windows in place with signs, we are rebuilding. When I got home, the hawks, coopers, and volunteers from the Lutheran church were there. The volunteers shoveled off the porches, kitchen, and started the cellar, while the hawks and coopers worked upstairs. They put a lock on the front and middle room. I also want one on the attic, front closet, and back room. The Leckstroms also came and helped wash down the walls downstairs. I am so grateful for all this help. I could never do it alone. We all had supper together. So again, those are just a couple of first-person accounts shortly after. I don't know if anyone else has any more stories or if you have questions. I know some of you went upstairs and looked at some of the photos that we have from our collection. Now's your chance.
If you haven't gone upstairs and looked at it already, make sure you check out the guest book for here, because there's some cryptic descriptions of as the water came into this building in particular. So that's on display upstairs.
So yeah, the guest book for this museum, the staff person who was here, he turned it into his sort of de facto journal for a couple of days, where he went out and got people off of the street and came and helped him move things that were in the basement, because this was a museum for the Historical Society, and they were trying to move things up, and he writes some really poignant, kind of very short comments about that activity. We also, in the library, 2 doors down, our library, we have a high water mark in that building too. And we lost some things. We also had quite a number of items get damaged. A few of them are up in the exhibit. You might have seen them. They did manage to do some conservation work on those shortly after, but you can still see where the stains and some of the damage was done. And we had quite a lot of books and manuscript collections that were damaged. The Historical Society had bought the Bishop Library building at 49 South Franklin in May.
And the irony is, it was in part because, part of it was we were just too big, but it was also in part because we didn't want to keep things in the basement here, and we thought they would be safer next door. So we had begun moving them over. When Agnes hit.
Just in time, I guess.
I always wondered, since I came here in 70, I always wondered, I don't remember people talking about the flood before, the flood of 36. It was not like it was anything imminent or going to happen. And so that sense of being prepared it wasn't in front of people's mind. In the way we stored things and the way we kept things, at least maybe older people who had been through the flood of 36 understood that. But
there was a lot of confidence in the levee, because the levee was the absolute state of the art once it, in its initial form, once it was finished after the 36 flood. It was the Army Corps of Engineers held it up as this is what we could do. And that's where
so is this the security?
Yeah, it was the security, it'll take a 300-year flood, to go over it. Well, we had one, and we almost had another one.
Right. And now, of course, over at the library, we don't keep anything in the basement.
No.
It's pretty empty, and we're pretty careful about what we put in the basement of this
Very
building
little
too.
here.
Well, even things are fast though, 'cause I live in South Wilkes-Barre and 212, and they asked to evacuate. Linda and I, as we were starting to try to move furniture, and here's 2 old people trying to move furniture up there. We realized at that point, even the first floor, because our house had come in on the first floor, but we didn't have the energy and strength or the time to move it up. And you can't spend your life, living on the second floor buildings with nothing on the first. So we just kind of said, well, we did it, we tried, and let's just go.
Well, we are going to have another program in November, a panel discussion called Could It Happen Again? So I hope you will all think about coming back for that. And I think we may try to do another community conversation session like this one. The exhibit's up until about a year, till late summer, early fall next year. So we hopefully could try this again and see if we can get some more accounts. We're fortunate, thanks to the Luzerne Foundation, to be able to videotape this tonight, and we'll be taping the program in November because we would still like to collect and remember what happened. So I'm so happy that you brought those photos. If you don't mind, at the end here, we'll take some video of them. And if you know other people who have photos or accounts or objects, please do let us know. We're very interested in that. Upstairs, one of our most recent acquisitions is the distilled water bottles that are up there. We just were given those just mere weeks before we opened the exhibit. Someone had found them while they were cleaning out, and that had the story of dating back to the flood, and they say they expire in 1976, so I think it's probably a good story. And of course, distilled water is very valuable after a flood. You hear a lot now about Puerto Rico and the recent floods in Houston and Florida, and how the water is clean water is the first thing to go. So it was very nice to have that donated to us to add to the exhibit.
And Harvey, especially in Houston, is very similar to Agnes in that it just stopped and just sat and just rained and rained and rained and rained. There wasn't necessarily so much wind, there wasn't necessarily so much hail or any of the other things. I mean, that you hear about in a hurricane, but there was just water, loads and loads and loads of water.
So if no one else has questions or comments, we can wrap up for now. But again, if you didn't go upstairs or if you want to go back upstairs and take a look, we're here. And we appreciate hearing from those who had things to share, and we'll take some video of your photos. Great.